The pipe organ's resonant tones filled Holy Trinity Cathedral while I waited at the front, fingers gripping my champagne-colored gown. Before me sat 180 guests, relatives, companions, associates, anticipating my transformation into Mrs. Marcus Hayes. Afternoon sunlight poured through ornate windows, creating prismatic patterns on the polished floor. My pulse wasn't elevated from excitement, though. It pounded with devastating knowledge threatening to tear me apart. How many months had their deception continued? Looking past the assembled crowd, I spotted my mother occupying the first bench, her jade outfit impeccably chosen, her expression beaming. She appeared every bit the devoted parent. 48 hours earlier, I would have accepted that smile as genuine. 2 days ago, I inhabited a reality where mothers safeguarded their children and devotion held sacred meaning. Marcus pressed my palm, his hazel eyes radiating what I'd previously interpreted as commitment. "Prepared for this, Amelia," he murmured, his tone carrying that self-assurance that initially attracted me 4 years prior. I examined his features, the defined cheekbones I'd caressed, the lips that had sworn eternal fidelity, and experienced complete, terrible understanding. "Absolutely prepared," I responded steadily despite my internal turmoil. "More than you realize." 3 months before, I'd been blissfully, naively content. My identity is Amelia Catherine Lauron, and at 29, I assumed everything was perfectly arranged. I was the child my parents desired, graduated with highest distinction from Yale studying comparative literature, employed as chief editor at Horizon Press, recently betrothed to Marcus Hayes, our community's golden prospect. Our engagement resembled a storybook. Marcus, 32 and remarkably attractive, descended from Judge Franklin Hayes and philanthropist Eleanor Hayes. He practiced corporate law at Seattle's most distinguished firm, operated a Mercedes, and proposed during intermission at the Pacific Opera House while attending Madame Butterfly, my beloved performance. "Your future together will be magnificent," my mother, Vivian, had enthused that evening, examining the 3-carat diamond capturing light like imprisoned starlight. "The Hayes family holds such standing. You've achieved admirably, darling." I should have noticed her phrasing. Not "you'll find happiness" or "he's ideal for you," but "you've achieved admirably," as though I'd completed some arrangement rather than discovered my partner. My father, Reverend Thomas Lauron, showed greater restraint yet equal satisfaction. He'd established his standing on household principles and conventional ethics. Watching his sole daughter unite with such an esteemed family seemed validation of his 3-decade ministry. "Marcus exemplifies integrity," Father stated, embracing me warmly following dinner. "I recognize his affection for you, Amelia. More significantly, I see your love for him." Love. That word would eventually taste poisonous. Wedding preparations consumed the following weeks. My mother immersed herself with fervent dedication that both moved and drained me. She demanded control over everything: floral arrangements, catering selections, musical choices, even gown fittings. "Every mother dreams of this," she'd declare, examining magazines and making countless calls, orchestrating her daughter's flawless wedding. I appreciated her participation, even when she occasionally dismissed my choices. When I proposed meadow flowers for arrangements, she insisted upon ivory roses and hydrangeas. When I preferred a modest chamber ensemble, she contracted a complete orchestra. When I mentioned composing personal vows, she persuaded me that conventional vows possessed greater sophistication. "Believe me, sweetheart," she'd say with that smile I'd inherited, "Mother understands best." Marcus appeared entertained by our household interactions. He'd frequently arrive unexpectedly, enchanting my parents with anecdotes from his practice and praise regarding my mother's culinary skills. He and Vivian would spend extended periods in the kitchen together while I completed business communications or reviewed manuscripts, their laughter echoing through our Tudor-style residence like melody. "Your mother is extraordinary," he mentioned one evening while we strolled through Riverside Gardens, the identical location where he'd initially requested courtship. "She dedicates herself to perfecting everything for us." "She's consistently been that way," I responded, squeezing his hand. "During childhood, she'd spend weeks organizing my birthday celebrations. Every element required perfection. And they certainly were, I'm confident." He halted and faced me, palms framing my cheeks. "Just as you're perfect." I should have questioned why he devoted such attention discussing my mother. I should have noticed how his gaze lingered when she laughed, or how he always selected precisely which wine would delight her. I was deeply enamored, though, an infatuation I was discovering renders us spectacularly unseeing. The initial warning emerged 3 weeks before the ceremony. I'd visited my parents' residence after work to confirm seating plans, arms laden with response cards and my computer case heavy with manuscripts. The house felt unusually silent when I entered through the main entrance. "Mother. Father," I called, depositing my belongings in the entry hall. "In the kitchen, sweetheart," came my mother's voice. But something seemed different about it. Breathless, nearly flustered. I discovered her positioned at the basin, back toward me, washing dishes appearing suspiciously pristine. Her auburn hair, typically perfectly arranged, was disheveled. When she turned, her cheeks glowed pink. "Oh, Amelia dear, I didn't anticipate your arrival so early." "It's 7 o'clock, I said, consulting my watch. "My regular Wednesday time." Naturally. She dried her hands using a towel, avoiding eye contact. "Your father's attending the parish council meeting." Something felt wrong, though I couldn't identify what. The kitchen held an unfamiliar scent, not my mother's characteristic lavender candles, but something else. Something masculine and costly. "Did someone visit?" I inquired, settling at the kitchen counter with the response cards. "What? No. Only me." She returned to the basin. "How was your day, darling?" I nearly dismissed it. Nearly. But then I noticed something on the counter. A cup from our fine porcelain collection, reserved exclusively for special visitors. It remained warm. "Mother, whose cup is this?" Her shoulders stiffened. "Mine, obviously. You only consume tea during evenings." I felt fatigued, required caffeine. The falsehood hung between us like an active wire. My mother had never excelled at deception. Her indicators were as recognizable as my own heartbeat: avoiding eye contact, slight vocal tremor, compulsive dish cleaning. But I loved and trusted her, so I chose belief. "All right," I said simply, opening the first response card. "Let's address these seating arrangements." The evening proceeded normally, but something had altered. I noticed my mother checking her phone constantly, fingers tapping nervously against the counter. When Marcus texted around 9 saying he was working late and would see me tomorrow, I observed how her entire body appeared to relax. The second warning arrived 1 week later. Marcus had been distant, claiming work overwhelmed him. Our customary Friday dinners had been cancelled twice, and he'd missed our dessert selection appointment at the bakery. When I contacted his office, his assistant said he'd departed early. I drove to his apartment in Capitol Hill, a contemporary high-rise where the doorman recognized me. The elevator journey to the 18th floor felt endless. I knocked on his door, then used my key when there was no response. "Marcus, are you well?" The apartment was dark, but his vehicle was in the garage. I called his name again, walking through the space we'd already begun planning to redecorate following our honeymoon. The living area was empty, but there was a wine glass on the table. Just one, but it bore lipstick on the rim, a shade I didn't recognize. "Marcus." I attempted his bedroom door, but it was locked. That was unusual. He never secured his bedroom door. "I'm here." His voice came through the wood, muffled and strange. I'm not feeling well, Amelia. Stomach illness, I think. Let me care for you. No. I don't want you catching anything. I'll contact you tomorrow, okay? I stood there for an extended moment, staring at that locked door. In 4 years together, Marcus had never refused my help when he was ill. He was the type who wanted coddling when he had so much as a headache. But again, I chose trust over suspicion. Feel better, I said to the door. I love you. Love you too. The words came a moment too late. Truth has a way of revealing itself like water discovering cracks in a foundation. 2 days before my wedding, it came flooding through. I was at the office attempting to focus on a manuscript about Renaissance poetry when my phone rang. The caller identification showed my mother's number. Amelia, darling, I need assistance. Of course. What's the matter? I left some ceremony programs in my vehicle, and I'm having lunch with Mrs. Patterson from the floral committee. Could you stop by the house and retrieve them? They're in my Lexus in a tan envelope on the passenger seat. Sure, no problem. The drive to my parents' house took 25 minutes through Seattle traffic. I used my key to access the front gate and parked behind my mother's vehicle. The Lexus was unlocked, typical for our secure neighborhood. I opened the passenger door and immediately saw the tan envelope, but as I reached for it, something else caught my attention. A small black leather journal had slipped between the seats. I wouldn't have considered it except that my name was inscribed on the cover in my mother's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first page was dated 3 months ago, just after my engagement announcement. Marcus Hayes is everything I should have married. Attractive, successful, from the proper family. Instead, I settled for Thomas and his modest ministry. But perhaps it's not too late. Perhaps I deserve something beautiful for once. The journal slipped from my fingers. I sat in the driver's seat of my mother's vehicle, staring at her handwriting as the world tilted sideways. With shaking hands, I retrieved the journal and continued reading. He looks at me the way Thomas used to before the years and routine wore him down. When Marcus compliments my outfit or my cooking, I remember what it felt like to be desired. Today, he stayed after Amelia left for work. We talked for hours about literature and travel. He said I was wasted on provincial life. He's right. I know this is wrong. I know what it would do to Amelia if she discovered. But when was the last time anyone chose me? Really chose me. Not from obligation or convention, but from want. Page after page, entry after entry. My mother's careful handwriting documenting the slow, deliberate seduction of my fiancé. He kissed me today. Heaven help me, I kissed him back. We made love in his apartment while Amelia was at her reading group. He said I was more passionate than any woman he'd ever been with. I felt alive again. Marcus says after the wedding we'll find a way to be together. He says marrying Amelia is just what's expected of him, but his heart belongs to me now. The final entry was dated yesterday. Tomorrow night, the night before the wedding. He's coming over while Thomas is at his bachelor party planning meeting. Our last time together before Amelia becomes his wife. After that, we'll have to be more careful. But we've come too far to stop now. I closed the journal and sat in perfect stillness. Around me, the suburban afternoon continued. Sprinklers watering maintained lawns, children riding bicycles, dogs barking at mail carriers. Normal life happening while my entire world crumbled. How long? The question echoed in my head. How long have they been laughing at me behind my back? I thought about every dinner where they'd sat across from each other, every family gathering where they'd exchanged looks I'd been too trusting to interpret correctly. I thought about my father planning to walk me down the aisle tomorrow, blissfully unaware that his wife was sleeping with a groom. I thought about all the ways I'd been fooled, manipulated, and betrayed by the two people who were supposed to love me most in the world. That's when the tears finally came. Hot, angry tears that tasted like salt and betrayal. I cried until my chest ached, until my mascara ran in dark streams down my cheeks, until there was nothing left inside me but a cold, crystalline clarity. They had chosen each other over me. Now I would choose myself over them. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I checked into the Fairmont Olympic under a false name, paying cash and telling the desk clerk I was surprising my husband for our anniversary. The lie came easily. Apparently, I was learning to be as good at deception as my mother and fiancé. In my hotel room, I spread everything out on the king-sized bed like a detective organizing evidence. My mother's journal, screenshots of Marcus's recent credit card statements that we'd combined for wedding expenses, and a growing list of all the signs I'd missed. The expensive cologne smell in my parents' kitchen. The lipstick on the wine glass in Marcus's apartment. His sudden expertise in my mother's favorite wine. The way they'd both been so insistent about traditional wedding vows. Probably because they knew I might say something in personal vows that would expose their guilt. I ordered room service and sat cross-legged on the bed, eating overpriced pasta while I planned their destruction. The old Amelia would have confronted them privately. She would have cried and demanded explanations and probably would have ended up being manipulated into forgiveness. The old Amelia believed in second chances and the power of love to overcome anything. But the old Amelia was dead. She died reading her mother's journal in a Lexus while her world collapsed around her. The new Amelia understood that some betrayals were too profound for private resolution. This wasn't just about a cheating fiancé or an unfaithful mother. This was about two people who had conspired to make me complicit in my own humiliation, who had planned to continue their affair after my wedding, who had stolen not just my happiness but my dignity. They wanted to play games. Fine. I'd learned from the best. I called my assistant at Horizon Press. Rachel, I need you to do me a favor. Can you compile a guest list for everyone attending my wedding tomorrow? Email addresses, phone numbers, social media handles. Everything. Of course. Is everything okay? You sound. Everything's perfect, I said. And for the first time in days I meant it. I just want to make sure everyone has all the information they need for tomorrow. Next, I called my college roommate Serena, who worked as a freelance journalist in Portland. Amelia. Oh my goodness, your wedding is tomorrow. Are you freaking out? I am so excited. Serena, I need a favor and I need you not to ask questions. Okay. Her voice grew cautious. What kind of favor? I need you to be at Holy Trinity Cathedral tomorrow with your camera and your press credentials. Something newsworthy is going to happen, and I want it documented. Amelia, you're scaring me. I'm not the one who should be scared. The final call was the hardest. I dialed my father's number, knowing he'd be home from his bachelor party planning meeting. Amelia, sweetheart, you shouldn't be calling me. Isn't it bad luck for the father of the bride to talk to his daughter the night before the wedding? Father, I said, and my voice broke just slightly. I love you. No matter what happens tomorrow, I need you to remember that I love you and that none of this is your fault. Honey, you're worrying me. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Father. Everything's finally going to be right. After I hung up, I sat in the hotel room silence for a long time, thinking about justice and revenge and the difference between the two. Revenge was about causing pain. Justice was about revealing truth. Tomorrow I would serve justice with a smile. I woke at dawn and ordered coffee from room service, sitting by the window in my hotel bathrobe while the sun painted Seattle in shades of gold and rose. In 6 hours, I was supposed to become Mrs. Marcus Hayes. Instead, I was about to become something much more powerful, a woman who refused to be anyone's fool. My phone had been buzzing all morning with texts from my mother. Good morning, beautiful bride. I hope you slept well. I can't wait to see you walk down that aisle today. The flowers are perfect. The musicians are setting up. Everything is exactly as it should be. I love you so much, darling. Today is going to be the most beautiful day of your life. Each message felt like a knife wrapped in silk. At 10 o'clock, I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the last traces of the woman I used to be. When I stepped out, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked, maybe for the first time in months. My auburn hair, so much like my mother's. My green eyes inherited from my father. My face, which had always been called pretty but never remarkable. Today I would be remarkable. I drove to the cathedral slowly, taking the long route through downtown Seattle. The morning was crisp and clear, perfect wedding weather. Holy Trinity Cathedral looked magnificent in the morning light, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven like prayers made stone. Cars were already arriving, early guests, vendors, family members getting ready for what they thought would be a celebration. I parked in the lot behind the cathedral and sat for a moment, watching people I'd known my entire life bustle around in preparation for my special day. Mrs. Patterson from the floral committee. Mr. Chen, who'd been our neighbor for 15 years. Marcus's law school friends laughing and adjusting their ties. All these people who cared about me, who had taken time out of their Saturday to witness what they believed would be the beginning of my happily ever after. They deserved to know the truth too. I gathered my wedding dress, shoes, and makeup bag, and walked into the cathedral through the side entrance that led to the bridal preparation room. The small space was already bustling with activity. My matron of honor, Jennifer, was hanging up her dress, and my 2 bridesmaids were setting up a coffee station and arranging flowers. Amelia! Jennifer rushed over to hug me. Oh my goodness, you're glowing. How are you feeling? Like today is going to change everything, I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said in days. Where's your mother? I thought she'd be here by now. Check my phone. No new messages from Vivian since her sickeningly sweet good morning texts. She's probably at home getting ready, I said. You know how she likes everything to be perfect. What I didn't say was that I knew exactly where my mother was, because I'd been tracking Marcus's phone since last night using our shared account. He'd spent the night at our family home, leaving at 7 this morning, probably to avoid being seen by neighbors or my father. One last betrayal for old time's sake. As my bridesmaids helped me into my dress, I felt strangely calm. The champagne silk slipped over my skin like armor, and when they fastened the dozens of tiny pearl buttons up my back, I felt myself transforming into someone new, someone stronger. The dress had been my mother's choice, of course. A traditional ball gown with long sleeves, a cathedral train, and enough beadwork to rival a constellation. I'd wanted something simpler, more modern, but Vivian had insisted. This dress will photograph beautifully, she'd said during the fitting. Classic elegance never goes out of style. Now I understood why she'd been so invested in how I looked. She needed me to look perfect for the photographs that would document her son-in-law's humiliation. Jennifer pinned my veil in place, the same fingertip-length veil my grandmother had worn. You look absolutely stunning, Amelia. Marcus is going to die when he sees you. I certainly hope so, I murmured. At 12:15, the photographer arrived to take pre-ceremony shots. I smiled and posed, letting him capture what he thought were images of bridal joy but were actually photos of a woman preparing for war. At 12:45 my father arrived. Hello, beautiful girl. Father stood in the doorway of the bridal room, resplendent in his formal black tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled. At 59, Reverend Thomas Laurent was still a handsome man, tall, dignified, with a kind of genuine warmth that had made him beloved by our congregation for decades. He was also a man whose world was about to collapse. You look radiant, sweetheart, he said, his eyes growing misty. I can hardly believe my little girl is getting married. The bridesmaids and photographer tactfully stepped aside to give us privacy. I took my father's hands, these strong, gentle hands that had blessed countless couples, that had held me when I scraped my knees as a child, that had taught me to drive and to pray and to believe in goodness. Father, I need to tell you something before we walk down that aisle. Of course, honey. What is it? I pulled my mother's journal from my bridle bag and placed it in his hands. I found this in Mother's car yesterday. He looked confused as he opened it, but I watched his face change as he began to read. The color drained from his cheeks. His lips parted slightly, and his hands began to tremble. Amelia. His voice was barely a whisper. This can't be. Your mother would never. Read the dates, Father. Read all of it. He sank into a chair, still holding the journal, his eyes scanning page after page of his wife's betrayal. I knelt beside him, my wedding dress pooling around us like spilled cream. How long have you known? He asked finally. Since yesterday. I'm sorry, Father. I'm so sorry. He looked up at me, this man who had built his entire ministry on the sanctity of marriage and family, and I saw something break behind his eyes. What are we going to do? He whispered. We're going to walk down that aisle, I said firmly. We're going to let everyone see exactly who Vivian Laurent and Marcus Hayes really are. Amelia, no. Think about this. The scandal, the humiliation. The humiliation isn't ours to carry, Father. It's theirs. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him grappling with 30 years of conditioning that said family problems should be handled privately, quietly behind closed doors. There are 180 people out there, he said. 180 people who love us and deserve to know the truth before they witness what they think is a sacred ceremony. Your reputation. My reputation will be that I refuse to be made a fool of, that I chose dignity over silence. A knock at the door interrupted us. 5 minutes, everyone, called the wedding coordinator. Father stood up slowly, his legs unsteady. For a moment, I was afraid he might collapse right there, but he straightened his shoulders and looked at me with something like pride. You're braver than I ever was, he said quietly. I learned from the best. He offered me his arm, and together we walked toward the sanctuary doors. Through the glass panels, I could see the cathedral filled with guests, friends and family members who had traveled from across the country to celebrate with us. The altar was decorated with ivory roses and hydrangeas, just as my mother had wanted. The chamber ensemble was playing Pachelbel's canon, filling the sacred space with soaring melody. Marcus stood at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the successful attorney and devoted bridegroom. His best man and groomsmen flanked him, all of them smiling in anticipation. In the front row, my mother sat radiant in her jade dress, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked like every mother of the bride should look, proud, elegant, overcome with emotion at her daughter's happiness. The wedding coordinator opened the doors, and the processional music began. My bridesmaids walked down the aisle in their soft lavender dresses, smiling at guests and taking their places at the altar. Then the music swelled into the bridal march, and every person in that cathedral rose to their feet. Ready, Father whispered. I squeezed his arm. Ready. We stepped into the sanctuary, and I felt 180 pairs of eyes turn toward us. Cameras flashed. People smiled and whispered about how beautiful I looked. Marcus's face lit up when he saw me, his hazel eyes warm with what looked like genuine love. My mother pressed her handkerchief to her eyes, the picture of maternal devotion. What incredible actors they both are, I thought as we walked down the aisle. They should have been on Broadway instead of being in my life. We reached the altar, and Father placed my hand in Marcus's before taking his seat, the gesture that was supposed to symbolize one man giving his daughter to another. Instead, it felt like I was being handed over to my enemy. Dearly beloved, Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying easily through the cathedral sound system. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Marcus William Hayes and Amelia Catherine Laurent in holy matrimony. I let him speak, following along with the traditional ceremony, waiting for my moment. Marcus squeezed my hand and I squeezed back. In the front row, my mother watched with glowing pride. They had no idea what was coming. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by the divine. How appropriate, I thought. Let's talk about reverence and divine purposes. If there is anyone present who has just cause why these two should not be joined in marriage, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. This was it. The moment I'd been planning for. The moment when I could have spoken, could have revealed everything right then and there. Instead, I remained silent. I let Pastor Williams continue through the vows, the ring exchange, all of it. I wanted them to feel safe. I wanted them to think they'd won. Marcus, Pastor Williams said, do you take Amelia to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, forsaking all others, until death do you part? Marcus looked into my eyes. His voice strong and clear. I do. Forsaking all others. The lie was so brazen it almost made me laugh. Amelia, do you take Marcus to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, forsaking all others, until death do you part? This was my moment, the moment to say, I do, and become complicit in my own deception, or the moment to burn their world down with the truth. I looked out at the congregation, all these faces filled with expectation and joy. I looked at my father in the front row, his eyes encouraging me to be strong. I looked at my mother, still dabbing at her eyes with theatrical emotion. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral sound system, I have something to say first. The cathedral fell into perfect silence. Even the chamber ensemble stopped playing. Marcus's hand tightened on mine, his smile faltering just slightly. Amelia. Pastor Williams looked confused. Is everything all right? Everything is perfect, I said, turning to face the congregation. I just realized that before I make the biggest promise of my life, I should probably be completely honest about everything. 180 faces stared back at me, confusion replacing celebration in their expressions. Marcus's grip on my hand was almost painful now. Amelia, what are you doing? I pulled my hand free and stepped slightly away from him, closer to the microphone. In the front row, my mother had gone very still, her handkerchief forgotten in her lap. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I began, my voice steady and clear. It means everything to me that you would take time out of your lives to witness what you thought would be the beginning of my happily ever after. Murmurs began to ripple through the congregation. I could see Serena in the back, her camera discreetly positioned. But I've learned recently that happy endings are built on truth, not on beautiful lies. And there's something you all need to know before this ceremony continues. Amelia. Marcus reached for me, but I stepped further away. Yesterday, I discovered that my fiancé and my mother have been having an affair. The words hit the cathedral like a bomb. Gasps echoed off the stone walls. Someone dropped their program. In the front row, I watched the color drain from Judge Hayes's face as he stared at his son. I found my mother's journal detailing their relationship. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. 3 months of secret meetings, lies, and betrayals. 3 months of them laughing at how easily they could deceive me. My mother stood up abruptly, her face flushed. Amelia, stop this nonsense. Sit down, Vivian. The sharp command came from my father, who had also risen from his seat. His voice carried the authority of 30 years of ministry, and my mother sank back into her pew as if she'd been struck. Marcus was frantically trying to salvage the situation. Everyone, please, there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Is it a misunderstanding that you spent last night at my parents' house? I asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. While my father was at his meeting, planning your bachelor party? The cathedral erupted in shocked whispers and gasps. Marcus's face went white. Is it a misunderstanding that you've been using our joint credit card to buy expensive wine for my mother? Wine that she specifically mentioned loving in her journal entries about your affair. Judge Hayes was standing now, staring at his son with horror and rage. Marcus, tell me this isn't true. Marcus looked around the cathedral wildly, seeing his reputation, his career, his entire life crumbling in real time. I can explain. Oh, please do explain, I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness. Explain to your father, to your colleagues, to everyone who believed you were a man of honor, how you seduced your fiancé's mother. Explain how you planned to marry me while continuing your affair with her. The silence was deafening. Every person in that cathedral was staring at Marcus, waiting for his explanation. And he had nothing. No smooth attorney arguments, no charming deflections. Just the truth, finally exposed in all its ugliness. In the front row, my mother was weeping. Not the delicate tears of a proud mother, but harsh, ugly sobs of a woman whose life had just imploded. Amelia, she choked out. Please, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said, turning to face her. I understand that you decided your daughter's happiness was a fair price to pay for feeling desired again. I understand that you looked at my fiancé and decided you deserved him more than I did. That's not, I never meant. You never meant to get caught. The truth of it hung in the air like smoke. My mother crumpled back into her seat, her jade dress now looking gaudy and desperate instead of elegant. I looked out at the congregation again. Family, friends, colleagues, people who had watched me grow up. Their faces showed everything from shock to sympathy to anger. But not one of them looked at me with pity. That was important. I refused to be pitied. I want you all to know that this isn't about revenge, I continued. This is about truth. This is about refusing to build a life on someone else's lies. And this is about choosing myself over people who chose each other over me. I began walking down the aisle, my cathedral train sweeping behind me like a queen's robe. As I passed the front row, I stopped in front of my father. Father, I'm sorry you had to learn this way, but I'm not sorry that you learned it. He nodded, tears streaming down his face, but his eyes were filled with pride. I love you, sweetheart. You did the right thing. I kissed his forehead, tasting salt and sorrow, then continued down the aisle. Behind me, chaos was erupting. Marcus was trying to explain himself to his furious father while guests stood and whispered and pointed. My mother was sobbing into her hands while Mrs. Patterson from the floral committee stared at her with undisguised disgust. But I didn't look back. I walked through those cathedral doors with my head held high, my wedding dress flowing behind me like a river of champagne silk. The parking lot behind Holy Trinity Cathedral was my sanctuary. I stood beside my car, breathing in the crisp autumn air, feeling lighter than I had in months. The sounds of chaos from inside the cathedral drifted through the heavy wooden doors, raised voices, crying, the scraping of chairs as people stood and moved and tried to process what they'd just witnessed. My phone was already buzzing with calls and texts, but I ignored them all except one. Serena. Holy, Amelia, holy. Did you really did you? Did you get it all? Every second. My editor is going to lose his mind when he sees this footage. This is going to be everywhere by tonight. Good. Are you okay? I mean, really okay? I considered the question, standing there in my wedding dress in an empty parking lot, having just destroyed 2 lives and possibly my own reputation. I'm perfect, I said and meant it. Within an hour, the story was spreading like wildfire through our social circles. Within 3 hours, it was on local news websites. Within 6 hours, the hashtag was trending on social media as people shared Serena's video and dissected every moment of my cathedral confrontation. The reactions were everything I'd hoped for and more. Judge Hayes issued a statement through his law firm announcing that his son was taking indefinite leave to address personal matters. Translation: Marcus's career was over. No law firm in Seattle would touch him after this. Eleanor Hayes, Marcus's mother, sent me a handwritten letter that arrived by courier that same evening. Dear Amelia, I cannot begin to express my horror at my son's behavior or my admiration for your courage today. You deserved so much better than this betray. Please know that you will always have my respect and support. With deepest regrets, Eleanor. The congregation of Holy Trinity rallied around my father in a way that brought tears to my eyes. By Sunday evening, over 90 people had called or stopped by to express their support and disgust at what had been done to our family. But the most satisfying response came from my mother's social circle, the women she'd spent years trying to impress with her perfect marriage and perfect daughter. Within 24 hours, she'd been quietly asked to step down from her position on 3 different charity boards. Her lunch invitations dried up. Her phone stopped ringing. Vivian Lauron, who had built her identity on being the perfect pastor's wife, suddenly found herself the subject of whispered conversations and shocked stares wherever she went. She tried to call me dozens of times. I let every call go to voicemail. 3 days after my non-wedding, I sat in my father's study, watching him pack boxes with 30 years' worth of theological books and sermon notes. You don't have to resign, I said for the dozenth time. Yes, I do. His voice was tired but resolute. I can't preach about the sanctity of marriage when my own wife made a mockery of it. The congregation deserves better. Father had aged years in the past 72 hours. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his shoulders more stooped. But there was something peaceful about him too, like a man who'd been carrying a weight he didn't know was there until it was finally lifted. What will you do? I've been offered a position at a small church in Montana. Interim pastor while they search for someone permanent. It'll give me time to figure out what comes next. And mother. His face hardened. Your mother has made her choices. She can live with the consequences. Through the window, I could see Vivian loading suitcases into her car. She was moving in with her sister in Portland, the only family member who would still speak to her. Have you talked to her at all? Once. To tell her I'd filed for divorce. The word hung in the air between us. Divorce. In our family, that word had been unthinkable. My parents had been married for 32 years, had built their entire lives around the idea of, until death do us part. I'm sorry, Father. Don't be. You saved me from living a lie. He taped up another box, his movements careful and deliberate. I would have gone to my grave never knowing who I was really married to. A knock at the front door interrupted us. Father went to answer it while I continued packing his books. I could hear low voices in the hallway, then footsteps approaching the study. Amelia. Father appeared in the doorway with Judge Hayes behind him. Franklin Hayes looked like he'd aged as much as my father. His usually immaculate appearance was rumpled, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and shame. Judge Hayes. I stood up, smoothing my jeans. I'm surprised to see you. I needed to apologize, he said simply. For my son, for what he put you through, for what he put both our families through. I studied his face, looking for signs of blame or resentment, but found only genuine remorse. Thank you. But you're not responsible for Marcus's choices. Aren't I? His laugh was bitter. I raised him to believe he was entitled to whatever he wanted, that his charm and good looks would get him out of any trouble. I created the man who betrayed you. No, I said firmly. You raised a son. He chose to become a man without honor. That's on him. Judge Hayes nodded slowly. Eleanor and I are getting counseling, trying to figure out where we went wrong, how we failed him so completely. Don't let his failures define your marriage, I said. Some people are just broken inside. It doesn't mean everyone who loved them is broken too. He studied me for a long moment. You're remarkable, you know that? Most people would be destroyed by what happened to you. Instead, you're offering wisdom to a foolish old man. I learned from the best, I said, glancing at my father. After Judge Hayes left, Father and I finished packing in comfortable silence. As the sun began to set, painting his study in shades of gold and amber, he closed the last box and looked around the room that had been his sanctuary for over a decade. Any regrets? Yes. About the divorce? About leaving? No. He paused. About raising a daughter brave enough to choose truth over comfort? Never. 6 months later, I stood in the gardens behind my new apartment in Portland, Oregon, watching spring emerge from winter's grip. Cherry blossoms dotted the landscape like pink confetti, and the air smelled of fresh grass and possibility. My phone rang, Father's weekly check-in call. "How's Montana?" I asked without preamble. "Beautiful. Peaceful. The congregation here is small but genuine. No politics, no drama, just faith and community. Are you happy?" "I'm getting there. What about you? How's the new job?" 3 months ago, I'd been offered a position as executive editor at a prestigious publishing house in San Francisco. The salary was substantial, the work challenging, and best of all, it was 400 miles away from the wreckage of my old life. "I love it," I said honestly. "The city, the work, the anonymity. I can walk down the street and just be Amelia. Not that woman from the wedding video." "Good. You deserve a fresh start." The wedding video had eventually faded from viral status, replaced by newer scandals and fresher drama. But for several weeks, I'd been the internet's darling, the woman who chose dignity over silence, truth over comfort. The attention had been overwhelming but ultimately empowering. I'd received thousands of messages from women sharing their own stories of betrayal and thanking me for showing them it was possible to choose themselves. "Have you heard from her?" Father asked as he did every week. No. And I hadn't. Vivian had tried reaching out through intermediaries. My aunt, old family friends, even my former boss. But I'd made it clear that I had nothing to say to her. Some betrayals were too profound for forgiveness. At least not the kind of cheap forgiveness that pretended nothing had happened. Maybe someday I'd be able to have a conversation with my mother. But not today. Not yet. What about Marcus? His attorney contacted mine last month. Apparently, he's in therapy and wants to make amends. I laughed, but there was no bitterness in it anymore. I told my lawyer to inform him that the best amends he could make would be to leave me alone forever. After the call ended, I sat in my garden with a cup of coffee and my latest manuscript, a memoir by a woman who'd rebuilt her life after discovering her husband's 15-year affair. The parallels to my own story weren't lost on me, but I'd learned to find strength in other people's survival stories rather than pain in their betrayals. My doorbell rang, interrupting my reading. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, I found a delivery person holding a massive bouquet of meadow flowers, the kind I'd wanted for my wedding bouquet instead of my mother's choice of roses and hydrangeas. The card was simple. "For choosing yourself. From someone who understands. A friend." No signature, no return address, but I didn't need one. Over the past months, I'd connected with dozens of women who'd found the courage to leave toxic relationships, to speak truth to power, to choose their own happiness over other people's comfort. We were a sisterhood of survivors, and we looked out for each other. I arranged the meadow flowers in a vase and placed them on my kitchen table, where their natural beauty brightened the entire room. Then I returned to my garden, to my manuscript, to the life I was building one deliberate choice at a time. 1 year later, I stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Pacific Hotel, looking out at 90 faces, writers, publishers, and readers who had gathered for the Western Women's Literature Conference. The nameplate in front of me read, "Amelia Laurent, keynote speaker, The Power of Authentic Voice." A year ago, I began, my voice carrying easily through the sound system. I stood at an altar in front of 180 people and made a choice that changed everything. Not the choice everyone expected me to make, but the choice that honored who I really am. In the audience, I could see women nodding, leaning forward in their seats. My story had become a touchstone for many, not because of the drama or the revenge, but because of the deeper truth it represented. We're taught from childhood that keeping the peace is more important than keeping our dignity. That being nice is more valuable than being honest. That other people's comfort matters more than our own truth. I paused, thinking of that morning in the hotel room when I'd looked at myself in the mirror and decided to become someone new. But here's what I learned. When you choose truth over comfort, when you choose yourself over people who have chosen to betray you, you don't just change your own life. You give permission to everyone watching to do the same. The applause was warm and sustained. After my speech, dozens of women approached me to share their own stories of choosing courage over silence, authenticity over approval. Late that night, I sat in my hotel room with a glass of wine, scrolling through messages from women who'd watched my conference speech online. Their words were variations on the same theme. Thank you for showing me it was possible. Thank you for choosing truth. Thank you for refusing to be silent. My phone buzzed with a text from father. Watched your speech online. Grandmother would be proud. I stared at the message for a long time. He meant my grandmother, of course, the woman whose veil I'd worn on my non-wedding day, who had taught me that strength could look like grace, and that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was refuse to enable someone else's cruelty. But part of me wondered if he also meant Vivian. If somewhere in Portland, living with the consequences of her choices, my mother had watched her daughter speak about courage and felt something like pride mixed in with her regret. I would probably never know, and I was okay with that. Outside my hotel window, San Francisco sparkled like scattered diamonds against black velvet. Somewhere in that maze of lights were millions of people making choices. Some brave, some cowardly, some that would change everything. I raised my wine glass in a silent toast to all of them, but especially to the ones who would choose themselves when the world told them to choose silence. The ones who would speak truth when speaking lies would be easier. The ones who would walk away from beautiful prisons disguised as happily ever after. Here's to the ones who choose freedom, I thought. Even when freedom looks like standing alone at an altar, telling the truth to people who would rather believe the lie. I finished my wine, closed my laptop, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow I would fly back to my life in San Francisco. My job, my apartment, my garden of meadow flowers. The life I had built not on someone else's foundation, but on my own unshakable truth. And if that wasn't a happily ever after, it was something even better, a beginning that belonged entirely to me. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction, but liberation. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is choose herself when everyone else expects her to choose silence. And sometimes the best happily ever after is not the one you planned, but the one you create when you finally learn to value your own truth above everyone else's comfort.